Thank you, Gil. And congratulations for the winning of the award. Well deserved. For me, the journey of Checkpoint represents the journey of the entire industry. We moved from trying to protect the perimeter to trying to protect assets, and today we live in a world where we have no borders. It is not clear today in the world of cloud services where does the organization and the service provider begins. When people bring their own devices to work, it is not clear where does the organization and the employees begin. So we need to reinvent the way we think, the core way we think about cybersecurity. And for me, the vision the Checkpoint presents is very, very interesting in that sense. I want to move forward to the next session, a glimpse into the future with cyber leaders. I'm going to call to the stage two amazing people, amazing cybersecurity leaders. It's going to be a fireside chat with General Keith Alexander, the CEO and President of IronNet, and the former Director of the National Security Agency, as we know it, the NSA, and Nadav Zafrir, the CEO of Team 8 and the former head of Unit 8200. Please come to the stage. The microphones are already here.
I can't see the crowd, but I can see you.
I'd rather look at the crowd.
Yeah, I can tell. Well, we don't have a lot of time, but I wanted to start, Keith, by asking you, we both served for decades, back when it was called SIGINT, before it was called cyber, trying to do our best to protect our nations. And I left about 4 years ago. I think you left a year later. What does it look like on the other side?
It's amazing. Two parts. One, leaving the government, the military, was great. The people and the mission was amazing. When you get to the other side, you don't realize what it's like to run a business. What you have to do, you have to actually pay the people that work for you.
Isn't that amazing?
Every month. And it's also surprising to see the problems that they face in the cyber community. It's a big jump.
Is there anything that surprised you?
Yeah, I think the thing that surprised me the most is how difficult it is for the CISOs to do what they have to do. I know you brought the delegation here, so right. Thanks for doing that. And the problems they face in integrating all these different products to protect their network, and then those products change almost every week. Keeping up with that is almost impossible. So they have one of the most difficult jobs. What do you miss?
Well, I miss a world where I don't have to compete for talent. I miss a world where everybody remains at an average of 20 or 21, which is what I had in 8200. There's no IP involved. There's no money involved. The motivation is obvious. Everybody's super passionate about what they're doing. And actually, one of the reasons that we decided to go to the Team 8 model is to try to at least bring some of that ambience and that passion into what we do in cyber today. Because I agree. I mean, we met with the CISO delegation yesterday, Keith and I. And what I would say about being a CISO is that probably I wouldn't take that job right now. It's overwhelming. And there's a lot of luck that goes with it. I agree with Gil Schwade about you have to prepare for everything. But at the end of the day, it's overwhelming. And so what I wanted to ask you is 3 years later, when you work with companies all the way from the CEO board level, and then I know that you've recently met with the president trying to understand what's the state part in this, defending enterprises in this world.
So, we had a great opportunity to see what the threats are from hackers all the way up. And having lived in the world that we lived in, we got unique insights to those. And now what we see is what these CISOs and companies need. How do we now bring that to them? And I think there's a couple things that have to happen. That's that public-private partnership and a way of getting nations to help companies stop threats that are increasingly nation-state sponsored. And those are the things that I think are in the future, because it's obvious that cyber is being used as an element of national power, and companies alone can't defend it. So we have to figure out how to get that partnership to work, and I think that's the wave of the future. And I think one of the things that those of us, you and I and others coming out of government, can help do is bridge that gap.
Yeah, I agree. I think one of the things that we must be doing as we're defending ourselves, we have to check all the boxes, we have to get the hygiene, but we also must become more proactive. And I think one of the things that our experience allows us is to understand the mindset of what it means to be an attacker in the first place. Because I want to tell you guys that attackers are humans, at least for the foreseeable future. And most sophisticated attacks are carried out by humans. It is true that they now have access to capabilities that might be nation-sponsored, but they're still humans. And so they have vulnerabilities. And so we can take a more proactive approach within our networks on the enterprise level. But there's only so much an enterprise can do, and then it goes to the country, to the government. And so I'm interested, what are the kind of topics that came up in this meeting with the president?
So it actually was a great meeting with President Trump. My experience in these meetings is, first, he is straightforward. Without the press in the room, it was amazing to hear the questions and his focus on this topic. And his question to the energy sector that was there was, how do I help? What do you need? How do we help? How do we protect the grid? I think clearly focused on that. And he had his cybersecurity team there, Tom Bossert and Rob Joyce. And the mission was, we understand government has to help defend industry. How do we help? And there were four things, I think, that came out of that. One was that public-private partnership, how we do that. The second was, how do we get people read into the threats more so they understand what those threats are and the threat matrix and the security clearances that go with it. So my experience, despite what you read in the press, is he's focused on that problem. He understands the existential threat, and he wants to help protect industries. It was interesting, in the commission, there was arguments over, is it industry's responsibility to defend industry or government? And we brought out the preamble to the Constitution. It's for the common defense. It's the government's job to help. You can't just sit back and wait. And so I think that's visible, understood, and something they're going to take on.
Yeah, and one of the things that with our CISO delegation yesterday when we were doing Q&A, one of the questions was, so in terms of government, if there's a missile that comes at your country, and you're looking at it from the government's perspective, you do whatever you can to stop it. But if there's a missile that's about to hit, it's a cyber missile, you look at it and say, is it going to hit anything that has to do with defense? I'll stop it. However, if it's going to hit industry, well, what do I do now? And that's an interesting phenomena, and so hopefully these conversations with government will allow us to start working together. But I want you to get you in some trouble, because you haven't got into any trouble since this morning, to the best of my knowledge. But how does it compare to you worked with two administrations, and now you see this administration? How was it like to work for the previous administrations?
Well, I'll tell you, it was an amazing time that we had. I'd never expected when I got to NSA that the first thing they're going to do is say, you're going to brief the president and meet with them, and we did. What NSA does every day is something that's vital to our nation, just like what or 8200 does for Israel. It was a meeting with the president. I can give you a great short story about leadership with the president. So he came to Fort Meade, and I met him. I said, "Welcome to Fort Meade, Mr. President." He goes, "General, get in the car. We got to talk." Just like that, Southern accent. And so I got in the car, and he said, "There's two issues we got to talk about. First, I understand you got too many bosses." And it's true. I had 7 bosses: the president, the vice president, the Secretary of Defense, the DNI, my wife, and a couple others. And he said, "Well, we're going to fix that right now." And I thought, who are we going to throw under the bus? They're all senior to me. So I told the president, they're all good. We love them all. And he said, "Well, if that's ever a problem, we'll fix it right away." And I should have asked him, who are we going to throw under the bus? I just want to know, who was expendable? Was it Rumsfeld? Was it Negroponte? The second thing is he said, "General, this issue with the terror surveillance program, it's going to get real bad, real bad. Here's the deal. You protect the country, I'll take the heat." He did every step of the way. It was the greatest act of leadership that I've seen, because what he did is he went from there and stood in front of the press and said, "This program was to protect the country and something that I authorized as president." He took the heat every step of the way. He never squirmed, but he just took it. And I think when Chris and I had the Snowden ordeal, we took the same approach. That's what leadership is all about.
Well, let's move forward. We're in the business world now. You built IronNet, and I did the same with Teammate. From my perspective, there's one thing that's happening in the world right now that should bring us to the next level of security. And I want to hear your thoughts on that as well. But in my perspective, what's happening right now is that we're in a situation where enterprises are at a bad dilemma when they have to choose between productivity and security. And in many cases, that as an industry, this is where we must mature. I believe that the fact that we see security as a binary situation, you're either infected or not. It's all black and white. Are you infected right now? Yes or no? Well, what if the answer is, yes, I am, but I can live with the infection? That's one thing. The second one is the convergence between the physical and the virtual, which is happening in our national grids and is making everything more fragile. So as things become more fragile and hyper-connected, I think we must move to another paradigm, and it really a paradigm shift in security, where we're not just building security as an afterthought and another layer because we just can't layer ourselves anymore, but rather thinking about the infrastructure designed to begin with. In many ways, reinventing the infrastructure and creating infrastructure for the next internet, which takes security as part of life, as part of the design, as part of the architecture. A bit like Bitcoin has done to digital currencies.
Yeah, so that's a great point. In fact, what your folks briefed on Clarity, what Benny, was a great dive into the deep technical part of what you see with industrial control systems. Now, if we take that level of expertise and you figure out there's only one Benny, how do you now map that for all the energy companies in our nations? And then how do you bring those together? And what it quickly gets you to is that we've got to move to some kind of cognitive computational system that integrates machine learning, AI, and an expert system. And we've got to have the ability to see events that hit each company and share them across companies within a sector to get sector-wide visibility and protection, and then share sector information with other sectors and the government for a comprehensive program. That's technically doable, and that's where it'll go. It'll be driven by the cloud and by mobility. You see both of those coming, and the way the actual network is going, what it says is we the collective cyber community, need to come up with learned by a machine, given to a machine, and help people become much more proactive in going after the threat by seeing all of that layer. I think that's the wave of the future. And it does something that we've done in the past. It creates partnerships among countries. How do we partner for the common good? And I think that's what we're going to see in the future.
Yeah, look, I think it's imperative that we do it. I think that what we're seeing right now, especially if I look back at 2016, when we're a couple of years down the road, when we look back, we're going to think of 2016 as an inflection point. Because I think for the first time, on a grand level, we're seeing attackers going after the real infrastructure, electricity, systems, in the US elections. The internet itself, and it's going after our trust in our political systems, in our digital currencies, which means that in many ways, the very foundations of civilizations are under attack. And I think that going forward, trying to, as the world becomes more hyper-connected, attempting to just come up with the same solutions that are just slightly better is not going to work. One of the reasons, and Gil spoke about this as well, is that nation-state capabilities, unfortunately from your former agency as well, are being leaked. And unlike the past, attackers with limited resources can commoditize and weaponize these capabilities extremely fast, and that's what we saw in WannaCry. And so the question is, how do we deal with these small groups that could put their hands on national level capabilities?
So that's a tough question. First, we got to protect our assets and secrets better. That's clear. The second part is, this area is changing so quickly that WannaCry actually would have been solved if all the systems had been patched. And patches had been pushed out for the newer systems, but not for the old ones that were no longer supported until after the attack. So I think what we have to do is step back and look at that and say, there's a problem there. We're not patching, and the way we're doing it is humans are involved. If humans are involved in patching, identifying vulnerabilities, and protecting, we're in the wrong place, because the machines are going at milliseconds. And we're talking about patching things that takes days, weeks, and months. That's the wrong framework. So we've got to automate, and we've got to get to an automated system that helps bring that up and brings the humans up to a different level. If this goes to nation states attacking nation states in cyberspace, which we believe it will, we have to have a system that can protect our nations. And in that, the protection of our nations is not just the government or the Defense Department. It's the critical infrastructure, finance, energy, healthcare, the communications. Without that, there is no country. And so we're now getting to a point where, it's interesting how our country grew up. Soldiers, well, that's where we begin. And we've got to bring that partnership back.
Well, I think we're almost out of time. We've been privileged to have this bilateral camaraderie between our countries in our previous lives and now in the business world. I think that's essential. A word of optimism for all the cyber experts and even the CISOs that have almost an impossible job is that, first of all, the hyperconnectivity is bringing prosperity. And we mustn't go back and disconnect ourselves, because the benefits and the opportunities in a hyper-connected big data AI world far surpass the challenges that we face right now. And I believe that if we put our hands together, different countries, industry, government, academia, which is hosting us right now, we will prevail. So thank you very much. Thanks, Keith.